I'm going to hand over next to, I think it's Justin. An update from, I just assumed it would be Tessa, but we've got Justin Kitzes here to give us an update from the AudioXD workshop from 2 weeks ago. Justin.
Yes, you got it. So yes, unfortunately for you all, I am not Tessa Reinhardt. I am Justin Kitzes. So I'll be here, giving a quick update on I think, very successful meeting that we had recently at the University of Pittsburgh called AudioXD. So our lab had a award from the Academic Data Science Alliance, ADSA, and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation to host a 3-day cross-disciplinary meeting of researchers who work with audio data and audio data analysis. We had about 40 attendees from a variety of disciplines, including, of course, ecology and conservation, but also folks representing linguistics, business, music, computer science, other disciplines. The meeting was an unconference format, so it was focused very much on participant-driven topical discussions around all sorts of questions about audio data and analysis. So, of course, from that bigger picture, what's going to be, I imagine, of most interest to the people here is we had very heavy representation of bioacoustics people in the room. Probably about 2/3 of the attendees there had some relationship with bioacoustics. And just to be clear, although it's probably obvious to this room, in this case, by bioacoustics, we mean specifically people who do field audio recording. It was mainly a terrestrial group with the goal of using that audio to learn about biodiversity distributions, species richness, abundance, things like that. We were particularly happy with the breadth, I think, of the attendees we were able to bring together. We had folks who specialize, in machine learning, all the way through people who build infrastructure and platforms for serving audio data, people from government agencies who are interested really in just application and the conservation management implications of bioacoustic surveys, as well as people who have been in the field for a while and work across all aspects of that pipeline, from deployment all the way through analysis. So, as I mentioned, these different groups of people had a chance to come together, help set the agenda for the discussion, and work with each other on common topics of interest. So eventually we will have a blog post, hopefully before too long, summarizing the meeting and some of the takeaways in more detail. But in short, what did we discuss and what did we take away? So 4 items that came out of the discussion that I thought were particularly interesting and important. So first one is, there are many people working on platforms for ingesting, managing, and displaying bioacoustics data. And there was agreement, certainly within the room, that we should do a better job of making these interoperable, to use Steph's word for that. We discussed the idea in particular that there didn't necessarily need to be one bioacoustic platform to rule them all, that everyone would use. In fact, that's likely both a bad idea and probably impossible, given the constraints that a lot of groups are operating under. But what we did want to see and think about is finding ways for people to be able to take different models that they've built, different annotated data sets, maybe even different field data, and move them from platform to platform and be able to share work from platform to platform. So that was one of the first big takeaways. Second one, I would say, was some discussion about having a central database or even just a list of all of the annotated data, but also field data and models that everyone has collected and generated. And again, there are some constraints some people are working under around sharing everything. And so it's not necessarily the need to share all of the data per se, which is both challenging and maybe not always possible, but certainly sharing information about what has been done so that folks know who to contact and how to talk to each other to encourage both reuse and potential collaboration. That was the second thing. From a third point is from a technical perspective. So we did discuss species classification, of course, but I mean, the folks in the room are probably aware that species level classification, particularly with convolutional neural networks and similar methods, is becoming a reasonably well explored space at this point. So we had some discussion about sort of what comes next from a technical perspective. And there were 2 kind of newer ideas, I think, that were particularly came up in discussion. One of those is a growing focus on representation learning. So thinking harder about expressing audio in these low-dimensional embeddings that are general and applicable to many different types of sounds, which has some promise for both speeding up classification and also enabling progress for problems where there's very little training data, things like rare species. Another thing, or the second technical aspect, I think that came quite clearly, was focusing on tasks that are not exactly sort of the species classification problem we all know and love, but tasks like estimating species abundance from monaural recordings, automated identification of individual organisms, identification of sounds that have demographic significance, and things like that. So that was the third. And then finally, the last point was that I think there was definite enthusiasm for meeting again. I think a lot of people met for the first time, and there was definite enthusiasm for continuing to get together as a community. So we're hoping to meet again. We're hoping to even expand to include additional members of the bioacoustics community going forward, potentially some of you on this call even. We have some hopefully becoming very concrete directions that we're moving towards in that sense, including with the Wild Labs community coordinators and others here, both for virtual coordination and hopefully for more in-person meetings as well going forward in the next few years. So if you're interested in this, please do keep an eye out. You haven't seen the last of me or Steph in particular on this topic or this bioacoustics group as a whole. So we're looking forward to it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Any, okay, IBAC mini conference coming up, Carlos. There's been quite a bit of discussion in the chat around, particularly your point around bringing the first 2 points around different platforms, making sure they're interoperable, but also quite a few people talking about the need for repositories and like identifying not just data sets, but different data repositories as well. So a library of libraries, and we get a little meta here. But I don't think there are any specific questions. Justin, a question from me. What was the most surprising thing that you had come out of the workshop?
The most surprising thing, I mean, we do a lot of this. It's hard to be surprised at some level, but I think, I don't know if this was exactly a surprise per se, but you heard me say this there. So Steph was there for those who aren't aware of why she knows so much about this. I think having it's for the US context, having the government agency representatives in the room was really important and really different. And I don't know that it was surprising to people, but I think it was really important to have a lot of the folks who work more on the technology side of things engage directly with the folks who are on the management side of things and not on the technology side of things, because I think there can be sometimes a little bit of a disconnect between what seems interesting from a technical perspective and what's really being asked for from a management perspective. So I thought that was a particularly important aspect of the meeting.
Excellent. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It was yeah, it was definitely an important part of it. Any questions from anyone? Was it just US? Carly, did you want to jump in?
Yes, hi.
Good morning.
I'm on the West Coast currently, and no one needs to see me in my pajamas. So I'm not going to turn my video on. But hi, Justin. I'm very sad that I couldn't make it to the workshop. I'm at the CV for ecology thing here, so I promise I'm still doing bioacoustic things. I was just wondering if it was only US government reps, because while yes, that's very important, I think a lot of governments are run very differently. So I'd be interested on your take on how to incorporate government officials from, the range countries that we're working in and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I should say I couldn't agree more with that. I think the comment on the US agencies was more in terms of, management sort of responsibility is different in different parts of the world. And in, the US context, a lot of the agencies have a lot of monitoring work that goes on that feeds into management decision-making. We did have some representation from Canada. Steph came from the UK. Essentially the scope was limited as always by funding. We had travel support for a limited number of people. We did have, we did invite more folks from Europe, but we were also up against Dan Stowell's workshop, actually. So we didn't get a lot of uptake from the UK and from Europe. I absolutely think that there should be more expansion internationally. It's just a hard problem when you're talking about in-person meetings. So it's kind of that challenge of virtual versus in-person, the value of both and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think probably the next big step is trying to convene something that crosses all the continents. I mean, that at least gets more involvement from the groups in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and some other places in Europe that have been involved in this for a very long time. I think that was the biggest missing voice, actually, was those experienced researchers from those other places, and trying to expand out from there.
Cool. Any other questions? I think Justin is at ESA, so he's going to sprint off, but you can drop questions to Justin in the thread, the discussion thread on Wild Labs, if you've got follow-up questions as well. Oh, Carlos, actually, do you want to jump in? I know you've been dropping, I know you're like super involved in stuff, so do you want to just drop in a comment, jump in before I hand over?
Yeah. Yes, can do. Yeah.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How's things? Just really interested to hear about the 2 recent conferences. There's been a bit of a flurry over the summer, with that and the one in the Netherlands as well. The UCAN one that we did back in June in the UK. We had about 50-ish people in person and over 100, I think, online as well. The hybrid thing was not easy to organise, and luckily I had nothing to do with that, but I think it worked pretty well.
Okay, interesting.
Speakers and attendees dialing in remotely.
Yeah, we might follow up with you because there was a lot of discussions about standards and metadata and all of that sort of stuff, and I know you've been doing heaps of work on that in that space, right?
Yeah. So currently we're working on some ecoacoustic guidance, which is going to be quite sort of practical.
Who's it targeted to?
Conservation bodies, so people who are not necessarily haven't spent 10 years doing bioacoustics work, but interested in it. Nature reserve managers, wildlife trusts, and conservation organisations, how they can actually implement that, so they don't have to read all the 300 papers to work out what's a good way to do an acoustic project. And it's sort of building on the WWF guidance that came out, that Ella Browning and other guys worked on, which was sort of general principles and how you might use it. And this is going to be much more of a building on that and stepping up a layer in terms of coming out with actual sort of practical recommendations in terms of what recorders to use, how to set them up, how to deploy them in the field, and try and come up with not necessarily standards, but guidelines on how to implement a useful ecoacoustics project in the field.
That's super interesting. Have you are you going to build on Tessa's like guidance for best practice for large scale audio moth stuff?
Yes, this is going to be probably more focused on individual projects, so not national or regional monitoring programs, but if they wanted to implement a project on a particular nature reserve or a series of nature reserves, or within a sort of county sort of scale, how to do that. And it's going to not just look at audio moths, but the other kit that can be used, and how to deploy that, mostly for acoustic range and not ultrasound, because within the UK and other parts of Europe we've got very good guidance already for bats, for example, so we're not going to try and replicate that, but look at the use of acoustic indices or recording birds, amphibians and that sort of thing within the acoustic range.
Interesting. And one last question before I hand over, when's that coming out?
Yes, sometime, maybe Christmas.
Okay, that's
but it was hopefully going to be this autumn, but
look,
time's not our friend, but so it's ready and out and published, ready for people to start implementing that next spring.
Awesome. It'd be great to see that on Wild Labs as well.
We'll hit everything once it's out.
Awesome. Okay, right, acoustics, that's a wrap. Thank you, Justin.